Hello everybody and welcome to another live stream. So for today's live stream I will be blocking out the main shadows for my buildings for my sci-fi city. So let me just turn off this title card here so I can show you what I've got. And this is essentially what I've been working on since the last time you actually saw an update on this. I've actually gone in and added quite a bit of basic shadows into this building here. That one's pretty close to being completed, and I've started working on this one here. Once again, this is a task that I tend to do for the midground elements first before I actually start working on the foreground and the background elements. It helps me set the tone for the amount of detail that I'm going to actually add in there. So just one more quick thing before we continue on to this. I'm going to show you some of the other stuff I've been working on the side. So these are some of the keychains that I've actually been working on. So this is a D6 keychain, the D20, and these are the keychains that were featured on my Kickstarter. They will be coming shortly to my store. So just a quick update on that so you guys are aware. I'm working out some of the nuances for the site updates. Unfortunately, I can't do some of them too quickly. They have to actually be properly done before they become active. So when that does become active, I will let you guys know. All right. So once again, I am using Affinity Designer for this. For stuff like this, I actually found it actually works pretty darn good. Anything that's more brush related, I do switch to Photoshop quite often. But because this is more geometric, I am going to be using Affinity Designer in this case. I have also, excuse me, I have also been testing out with some initial prop designs. I have not been streaming those. So if you do follow my Instagram, you would have noticed that there's actually quite a few prop designs that I was doing for a while. Those were essentially initially a little way for me to test out different techniques that I could possibly use with Affinity Photo to see if it was actually capable of doing certain things. So I'm still kind of testing those out until I become more comfortable with it and I can find what its pros and cons are more thoroughly, because it is something I like to take my time doing. I probably won't post too much on that yet. Now, as somebody who does do freelance in the animation industry, I can tell you that it saves a lot of time for a lot of digital painters if you do some of these colors properly, and if you don't rely on using the multiply tool too often. And I do actually find that the Affinity Designer workflow actually works better using that method. You actually do run into issues when you use too much of a multiply, specifically when you're essentially nesting another layer within another curve, because it works differently than in Photoshop. So it's just something for you guys to keep in mind if you're struggling. It's actually better if you do use multiply and then color select it and apply the actual raw color that you want. Also, if you go on the top right hand, you can't see it with my window right now, but you can actually change your settings to the HSB sliders. Let me just see if I could change that. Yeah, there you go. So if you actually change this to HSLL sliders, it makes it a bit easier, because then you can actually just drag it on here to darken it, and then you can change the color tones and the saturation as well. So if you guys are struggling with that, that's probably actually what you want to start doing. It does make things a lot easier. Okay. So essentially what I'm doing right now is I'm going through and picking any areas that need a bit, essentially a slightly darker tone to them, so that they stand out more detail-wise. And I'm using essentially the shadows to do that, because I will be adding texturing to this with a brush. However, getting the basic shadows in without requiring any of that makes things a lot easier. Once again, it's just to simplify things so that if you have to give this to somebody else to do later, it's actually an easier workflow for them to convert it, because then they're just sampling colors. They don't have to make the colors from scratch. That's especially relevant when you're working with Photoshop. Although I do, like I said, I do find Affinity Designer kind of forces that workflow onto you, which is both good and bad. Having good workflow from the get-go is generally more useful, but it does tend to, I do find it tends to slow it down a bit, your workflow slightly. Overall, it's not too bad though. Okay. And if any of you guys are curious, for this image right now, I'm actually currently using a regular tablet. I'm not using a graphics tablet for this. I do recommend, though, for doing the line work, that you do actually use a graphics tablet. It does make life a lot easier. It isn't a necessity, though. For many years, I did not use one, so I can honestly say it is possible to use it. It just takes more time. So if you're doing freelance work, it might be one of those initial investments you might want to do, just to speed up your workflow. But I find for digital painting, it's not as much of a necessity. I found it specifically useful for line art, or anything that you're using a lot of the pen tool for, essentially. Then again, it also becomes super relevant. Okay, so essentially how I'm approaching this is I'm trying to find a somewhat efficient way of shading these portions. Uh, so I try to do like essentially a basic separation between the colors, and then I do a subdivision of it. That just makes it a little bit easier if I need to backtrack. Everything's kind of grouped together. Uh, it works in most cases. Sometimes you have to change things around to get them to work. And once again, that's just to simplify things. If I need to repeat this painting process, maybe another image that's very similar, um, or if I have to give it to another person. Okay. So what I did is I actually took this portion and just moved it back, receded it more, and separated it out from this element here. They're technically part of the same thing, but by making it just a little bit darker, it creates that instant separation. Now, that I'm probably going to make darker in actually just a moment, but I have to add more detail into here to find out just how dark I need to make it. And I won't know that until I actually start working on this portion. But for now, it gives me at least a starting point, and it's something I can still change after. This image also has a gradient, or has an intended gradient to go on top of it, and that gives it a bit more of an atmospheric effect. So that's this layer here. I have it turned off right now, just so that I can actually see the colors a bit more clearly, but it is something that's going to get turned back on later on. Okay. Right, so it's looking pretty good now. I'm going to go ahead and actually add the windows now. So a trick I found for the windows is I actually mostly just desaturate the color, and that's enough to make it look like it's more of a bluish tint. You don't actually have to make it blue, and you don't have to put it on a multiply layer of any sort. So I normally just choose the base color and just desaturate it from there. So this is actually not a blue color. If you're actually looking up here, it's actually a brown color, but because it's next to something that has more saturation, it looks more blue. You do have to play around with it to get it to work, but that's a pretty easy trick that you can use. And I'm also going to set this to color, so it will automatically color these portions. So it's not going to change the overall value, but it is going to add that color to it. Actually going to change the opacity. So the only downside would just changing the color, because I didn't actually change the color yet. I have it set to normal, is that it doesn't change in its darkness levels. Don't exactly like how dark it is though when it's there. Should be technically a bit lighter. Should be lighter like that. It's a bit dark. That's fine. I'm going to add another layer on top of it. There's not too many windows anyway on the other side, so shouldn't make a huge difference. Alright guys, that's going to be it for today, so I hope you guys enjoyed this live stream and I hope to see you guys soon. So thank you and take care.